Welcome, everyone. As you know, we're discussing the consumption end of net zero. I think a lot of the time companies focus on production, sustainable production, and just production efficiencies on their own won't really cut it if we want to get to net zero, if we want to keep 1.5 degrees alive. So we are also having to consume differently, aren't we, and consume in better ways. And so the consumption end of net zero is what we're discussing here today. And I think really what I want to try and get into is, as businesses, are we proactive enough to engage the customer? That's one question that with my expert panelists here, we'll start to get into. And the other one is, how do we really be effective when we've decided, as we have, to engage the customer? What makes an effective engagement? And we have a fantastically rich and diverse panel. We've got John Banner, Executive Vice President and Global Chief Impact Officer at McDonald's. We've got Michael, the Chief Exec of Fair Trade. We've got Ruth, Earth Care Strategy Lead. We've got Bhavesh, the Chief Financial Officer at British Land. And we've got Becky, Director of Group Environmental Sustainability at Lloyds Banking. So thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to jump straight in. We're going to start with Ruth. So Hi. Ruth, we're going to start with beauty products, cosmetics, Lush. How do you start to engage the customer on the net zero journey?
Oh, wow. It's a huge question. But I think one of the things that I think we have tried is to make, the number one thing is to make things available for customers in a really easy way together with the story. So I think more and more we're finding that data is great, and it's great to have the data to show customers, especially with all the legislation about green claims code. It's so important to have the data to back it up. But I think it's really the emotion and the storytelling and the campaigning and hearing the customer on that journey that I think it's important. We're about to launch a campaign in May because a lot of the work that we do at Lush is really paying attention to Scope 3 and the supply chain. And we have a supply chain that really weaves conservation and biodiversity protection in the supply chain. And then we were like, but we've never really connected that to product. So we tell the stories of the supply chain and we talk about the product. But hearing, telling the customer, by buying this, you're really protecting tigers, and we have camera trap footage to, I'm from Brazil, am I saying tigers? It's actually the spotted jaguar. I should not make that mistake. But yeah, seeing the spotted jaguar in the camera trap and connecting that to the customer, so that's a strategy that we want to test. And we tested many others, like financial incentives to bring back packaging to us. Also trying to change the way we see bathing, from moving away from cleaning into a mental health strategy that you do once in a while rather than your everyday cleaning strategy. Things like this that I think have been story-led, I think is the most successful. Financial incentive, it was really interesting because we gave a product for free for people who brought packaging, and we moved to a financial incentive. And we've seen an increase, but we thought it was going to double, and it didn't double. Yeah. So yeah, we're still figuring out how do we make this even more enticing for customers. Okay,
so you've sort of given us the big picture, and then in terms of getting into the customer engagement, and I mean, you have an eco-labeling program, and we're all conscious that there's new greenwashing regulations right now, so eco-labeling, we've got to be very careful, but it's got to be very effective. And also you've got a loyalty program. So how do those two things work?
At the moment, we have an interesting program for packaging, and we're developing, and again, I'll be able to come back in a year to tell how effective that was. We're trying to create an impact-based loyalty program. So instead of you being rewarded through your purchasing, you're rewarded through the impact that your purchasing have. So if you buy more naked products rather than packaged products, you will be incentivized, with free stuff or discounts. If you buy more products that are protecting biodiversity, or more products that are, that have some other outcomes that are protecting women or come from women-led cooperatives, then you will, and then again, you get an annual report of your impact through your purchases. Yeah, we're just building the extensive database behind this. But again, trying to make it story-led, even though there is a lot of data behind it. It's hearing the customer as part of this bigger story, collective story of impact.
Okay, and I'm going to ask everyone this question because that's kind of the reason we're all here. But what really works? I mean, we hear about nudging, we hear about emotional stories, we connect with the emotional side of the customer, or is it statistics, is it numbers, is it maths, is it the incentives you were talking about, is it something else? I mean, what really gets that uptake going?
So I think for us, what really works is two things: the emotional connection of our staff. Because if you come to a Lush shop, Lush is very staff-led sales. So making sure that the staff buys into the story, so that emotional connection, and the way we've done this over the years is we've brought the indigenous community from the forest that's being threatened by palm oil in Sumatra to talk to our staff. We've brought the smallholder farmers that are in Ghana doing permaculture and growing moringa in agroforestry systems. Like that direct connection to our staff has created the buying, which then translates into the customer. I don't know if people here have seen like the power of hairdressers, and there's a huge movement of hairdressers being trained to talk about climate.
Yeah.
Because you will be much more inspired and influenced by your hairdresser than you will by a TV ad. So empowering our staff to be able to talk about these things with customers, I think, is like our most successful strategy.
I love that, because I think in the Malcolm Gladwell book, training about HIV awareness, he also talked about hairdressers. And it's good that you sort of think about that kind of technique, because I think most of us don't ever go into that kind of innovation, but you try and go there.
And we are training our staff in carbon literacy. So like there is a person in my team who's trained by the carbon literacy program, and then we do that carbon and climate literacy with our staff as well.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Ruth, for coming back to you. Becky, we're going to go to banking. Now, Lloyds Bank, obviously, you're engaging corporate customers, individuals as well. You do a lot of work on homes and green mortgages, and I've worked in home improvement. It's very difficult to get people to green up their homes. We've got the draftiest homes in the UK and in Europe, as we all know. I mean, how do you start to engage the customer on this?
I mean, it is quite tough. So at Lloyds, we've got 26 million customers in the UK. So we touch pretty much every single community. And we also work both in construction right through to retrofitting, down to mortgages. So we cover the whole ecosystem. So this is something we've been doing a great deal of thinking about, particularly with homes, with the built environment being 25% of UK emissions. So it's a really big chunk that we've got to tackle. And this is just not easy. I don't have all the answers, but I can tell a little bit about some of the projects that we're doing. So we look really at three themes of education, incentivization, and then sort of facilitating the changes that are needed. So I think for a lot of this, it is absolutely about understanding, a bit like Ruth said. So we've also had a big internal training program of sort of 50,000 of our staff have done. But more importantly, it's how we can work with our clients and customers. So we've got a whole range of different tools for homeowners and for SMEs. So if you go into the Lloyds Bank website today, you type in Eco Home Tool, you can say your house type and your insulation, and it'll come up and it will tell you what you could do to reduce your fuel costs or reduce your energy costs. But that's really not enough. There is a really big cost issue here. And so we've got various different incentives that we're trialing. So we've been running a pilot called the Green Living Reward, where if you have a loan to do something green for your energy efficiency in your home, we'll give you £1,000 cash back. So that's sort of one example that we've been trialing. And then finally, I think it's about facilitation. So when we look at the built environment, we know we all should be insulating more, but we also should be changing how we heat our homes and how we cook our food and coming off of gas. And we do see heat pumps is really key. That's also part of the sort of the government's roadmaps on this. But it's really hard to find a heat pump installer. What do? Who do you ring up? How do you do that? How do you find someone credible who's still going to be in business next year or the year after if it goes wrong? And so there's these real issues outside of the sort of financial mechanisms. So we've partnered with Octopus on heat pumps, and we're saying, partner with us, work with us, and we'll connect you to some sort of accredited installers through Octopus. So it gives hopefully owners that little bit of confidence as well. And if you get your Green Living Reward from us, government grant, work with Octopus, you can get a heat pump down to £2,000. Now, that's not too bad, but we're still in a cost of living crisis, and I think there still are challenges. And I see this particularly with some of, with some of the very difficult houses. So I had a tour of sort of heat pump installations in South Wales last year, and we looked around. There were houses that had really had no heating at all and were very damp and very, very difficult places to live. And the teenagers were doing their homework under the duvets in their separate bedrooms. And when they put a heat pump in, they could come together as a family again. And I just think there's some remarkable stories there, and we shouldn't lose sight of that around these sort of financial mechanisms as well. It's absolutely the social side of it.
So, I mean, it's very challenging to get someone to insulate their homes or to install a heat pump. And part of the issue, I think, is trust, as you're saying, to find a trusted installer. The other thing is inconvenience. I mean, how do you sort of get the customer to do this stuff?
So I think we need to try and generate more of a value signal for if you do this to your house, then your house could be worth more, or perhaps we need to look at the stamp duty and talk to government about that. So what can you do for homeowners to see a definite value linked to doing these things to their houses?
Yeah, and for you, again, I mean, what works? Is it sort of, I mean, do you give green mortgage good special rates, or how do you get those hard incentives in there to get the sort of get them going?
So for green mortgages, we give a £250 cash back on green mortgages, but we're also looking at quite a lot of other different ways also of generating more green mortgages in this space.
Okay, you're going back to my old world of B&Q, where we couldn't give away insulation at one point. It's so difficult. Yeah. But you also at Lloyds Bank work with corporate customers, SMEs, sustainable finance. So as well as the sort of B2C, you also try that space as well. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, so 1 in 5 of all SMEs in the UK bank with us. We financed 7.9 billion last year, so it's huge. And they're the backbone of the UK economy, but it's also incredibly tough. They're having so many different challenges at the moment. Sustainability is kind of bottom of the list, really. And they don't have a director of sustainability like me to do all their number crunching and tell them what their carbon footprint is. So that's really where we think these tools and education and support can come in. So we've got something called the Green Buildings tool, where you can go online and you can work out the carbon footprint of your building, and that's so far been used and has quantified. I think it's 300 million square feet, which is like an awful lot, shed loads basically of area that's been used for. So that's another way that we're trying to work with SMEs. Thank
you, Becky. We're going to come back to you, John. Moving to McDonald's. Actually, the report out, I'm sure you saw, the FAIR Coalition says in this decade, meat and dairy could be hit by climate change losses of 24 billion. I mean, it's just a huge issue. We know McDonald's works on climate change. So this is in your interest to lower the footprint of customers. How do you go about engaging customers in your business?
It's an interesting question. The McDonald's brand is in 115 countries around the world. And we serve, along with our franchisees, close to 65 million people every day. So the problem with that scale is there's clearly advantages from offerings and from taking advantage of that to do business more sustainably, but also consumers are at different points in their journey towards understanding what sustainability is and what net zero is. There was a study that we saw that 48% of the consumers had no idea what net zero meant. So the challenge is that how do you serve 115 countries, and how do you provide consumers with better choices from a climate and sustainability perspective when they may not even be aware that that is a problem? And I think the problem that we have is that given the protein load that we serve, beef, chicken, eggs, the potatoes and wheat for our buns and everything else, we need a stable planet and a resilient one. And so if we're waiting for consumers to catch up with where the planet is going, it probably will be too late. So what we work with our suppliers and with our owner-operators around the world is to set targets around, in Europe, for instance, in the UK, we've eliminated plastic packaging. Almost 92% of our packaging in the UK and Europe is fiber and paper-based, and it's 99% either recycled or certified. Mm-hmm. So we've basically gotten rid of plastic in these markets because there's an increased awareness. So it's the question, and in some cases in a few countries, we're doing something called the Cup Collective, where we're allowing consumers to place their used cups into a cylinder at the end of their meal to be recycled into new paper products. So it really is it's what do we have to do to ensure that we have stability of supply and that we're regenerating the earth to allow for cattle and poultry and eggs and all the things that we need to serve. But then how do we approach consumers when they're ready and aware of what the issue is and attract them to our brand?
Okay, and at the customer end, you've got the menu, and I was reading you've launched 5 new menu items in the last 1 or 2 days all over the UK. It's splashed all over the favours. And then you've also got restaurant sustainability efforts as well.
Yep.
So how do you put that in front of the customer?
I think you clearly see in parts of Europe where sustainability is top of mind, where the experience, whether that's reducing the amount of plastic in Happy Meals and turning them into paper or fiber-based Happy Meal toys, and that creates demand and creates awareness of the issue. We're trying to reduce the amount of virgin plastic in Happy Meals, which is a big initiative that's part of a global commitment, not just in Europe and the UK. But I think where you see opportunity to engage with those customers, whether it's, we have some on-site renewable electricity. We do a lot of purchasing of, virtual power purchase agreements to try to decarbonize both our restaurants and our supply chain. So it's really where we have opportunity to communicate, whether it's about our packaging, which reduces not only the amount of oil and reduces climate change, reduces carbon emissions to paper from plastic, or where you have opportunities in some of our offerings to demonstrate that you're making a smarter climate purchase. You can do that, but it's not something that you can scale in every market, because there are markets where consumers aren't aware, and we can't wait for them to be aware, because that would put our supply chain at risk.
And can I ask you another sort of question? In my industry, the fashion industry, when we talk about leather, there's a conversation, we're behind food, but everyone's discussing plant-based alternatives to leather to reduce the customer footprint. Food, as we know, that conversation is booming in many markets. The younger generations are thinking about plant-based alternatives to meat and leather. I mean, how do you work with that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a plant-based offering in most of Europe that does pretty well. It's the McPlant. I think what you've seen, again, consumer attitudes change. If you look at what happened to plant-based meats and offerings in the U.S., most of those companies struggled after the pandemic, and they haven't really recovered. So I think consumers are at different stages. I think what we're working with our partners, our suppliers, who have themselves set net zero commitments as we have, so our suppliers are on board. When you're talking about all these restaurants in all these countries, you have to get the managing directors and the owner operators on board. I think what you would notice is that we have to make sure that there's stability of supply, and whether it's regenerative agriculture and grazing practices for cattle to try to reduce their impact and try to carbon capture on cattle farms. There's different techniques that are just being tried, but I think where we can lean in, where consumers are educated in this part of the world, where climate is more top of mind, where a McPlant could do much better than in some other markets.
Understood. Okay. Thank you, John. Bhavesh, it's very good to have a chief financial officer talking sustainability, because when you're a sustainability professional, like many of us, we talk what we talk, but to have you, Bhavesh, it's very good to have you. British Land is many things. One of the things it is a landlord. The landlord-tenant relationship over the last decade has changed quite a lot. I mean, maybe you could just start by telling us, how has that relationship changed in recent years?
Changed drastically. So real estate is much more operational business now. So, COVID accelerated a lot of trends that we were seeing prior to COVID, where employers are reevaluating what they want from their space and how they want to use that space. I'm sure all of you have done it, but every employer I talk to has done an employee engagement survey to say, what do you want from your office? When do you want to come back? And so we're pushing against a bit of an open door, because a lot of our customers that we talk to are banks, law firms, and they've got their own sustainability targets. And when they actually look to say, well, what can I do to hit my targets? There's not a lot. It's encouraging your staff to take public transport, or it's their choice of real estate, because real estate is a big emitter of carbon. And so we spend a lot of time educating our customers in terms of what good real estate looks like, how we build and develop, and how we can help them meet their targets.
And then in buildings, I mean, there's embodied carbon of making, constructing the building, which is very intensive.
Yeah.
There's the operational carbon when the building's finished and running that building. I mean, and that's quite complicated just for us to understand, let alone your tenants who are not clued up on this stuff. How do you begin to have that conversation?
Well, let me explain what both are, because you're right. Operational carbon is the energy used to run your office, and most people get that, right? So when we're engaging with our customers, they sort of get it, and they say, okay, how do I reduce my, usage of electricity or gas? And that's the first thing they look for. The second thing that we're seeing more customers, more sophisticated customers asking questions is embodied carbon. So the production and transport of materials to a site to build a building, to deconstruct a building, we measure that now. So we spend a lot of time educating them on what embodied means and what operational means. We've got
Can you say what the balance is? Because my understanding is embodied carbon is very much bigger than the operational carbon, but I might be wrong, in the lifetime of a building. So what might be the balance of embodied carbon versus operational carbon in the lifetime of a building?
Embodied is much
Okay,
more significant,
right.
yeah. So things that we're doing on the embodied front is reuse, recycle.
Yeah.
So I'll give you some examples of what we've done. We just redeveloped the building at our Regent's Place campus near King's Cross. And what we did is took all the windows off. What we typically would have done is shipped it to Germany, incurred the cost, and to ship it there, reconfigure, clean it, and bring it back, and then put it back on the building. We've instead chose to move it to somewhere in Essex. So we're minimizing the transport cost and the complexity and doing it locally. We will reuse material, so facades, we will then reuse and put into flooring. And our customers love that because we're giving them, a choice in terms of reusing and recycling material. We're also using innovative processes, or we're trialing and piloting things. So low carbon concrete, low carbon steel. One of our assets is Canada Water, which is a 50-acre mixed-use development on the Rotherhithe Peninsula. And that's a bit of a blank canvas for us. So we're trialing different sort of mechanics on concrete and steel. And the thing I found most interesting when I talked to our team is we're trialing something called passporting. And what we're doing is we're trialing on a building where we're building near Liverpool Street. And we're tagging every component of the building, kind of like RFID if you work in a retailer. So we know what's in that building as we construct it. And then when we deconstruct that building, we know what we can reuse, how long it's been there, what intervention we need to do if we need to replace something. So the way I think about it is we know all the ingredients of the building now, and we can track it so that we're much more sophisticated in what we need to intervene or recycle.
And on the tenancy side, I mean, I'm sure our stores, you're a landlord of us, and we're always trying to think, how do you engage staff or store managers to change their behavior, switch the things off when they don't need them, but also put in the right technologies, the smart sensors and all the rest of it. I mean, how do you really get tenants to change their behaviors, but also the technologies they could be using to cut down on the energy?
A lot of education, a lot of collaboration, working with them and testing and trialing things. As I said, we're pushing against an open door because they've got their targets. So they're exploring and wanting to work with us. So what can I do to use a become more efficient in the usage of my building? So example I'll give you is we have a development on our Broadgate campus on Liverpool Street. It will open in 2025, and we fully pre-let it 2 years ago. So 5 years out, we've already let the space. And one of our occupiers that took the space is Allen & Overy, which you all know, a law firm. And they chose that building because they can reduce their operational energy consumption by 80%. And when they were thinking about where should we, as part of this reevaluating what we want from our office, where do you want to be, they engaged a range of different folks in their organization, from senior folks, but also entry-level staff, different functions, to say, what do you want from the office? And sustainability was always one of the top, location's important, design's important, the sustainability is always in the top 3 category of things that they're looking for.
Thank you, Bhavesh. Thank you very much. The finale is really with Michael, because Michael, to a massive extent, you've achieved the things we want to achieve in net zero. Fair Trade has been a very trusted brand ethical brand for so long. I mean, how have you remained? Things can knock you off your perch anytime, can't they? Because some controversy or whatever. But how do you stay up there as a trusted option for customers?
Oh, and you're right. It can be bouncy sometimes, but I think the key to brand trust is authenticity. So, Fair Trade is trusted by 80% of consumers across all demographics. We research this regularly. And behind that is an expectation that we will deliver on our promise. So, the Fair Trade promise, a guarantee to, support the people at the sharp end of global supply chains, the people at the first mile, the farmers, the workers, the growers, to improve their lives. And I think there is something there for all of us, which is you have to be able to live your values, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you are living your values and you are making progress against those values. When you look at some of the failures there have been in terms of greenwashing and scandals over the last few years, it's when a company overclaims and underdelivers. And Fair Trade tries really hard, humbly, to do what it says on the tin.
And I wonder how, we all sort of go after Fair Trade bananas and all the other products you brand. How did you create the story that just powered up the customer to say, I've got to look out for that brand and go for it?
Well, it's a long story, obviously, in the sense that Fair Trade's been going for many years now, but really we tried to start at the source of the problem, at the cause of the problem, rather than tackling the symptoms. So if you look at some of the sustainability schemes we all see nowadays, you might find companies homing in on a particular problem and trying to solve a particular problem, whether it's gender inequality or child labor or deforestation. And our proposition is many of those things have a causal link back to long-term, low pricing, exploitation in global supply chains, which can make people poorer and the planet dirtier. And then we've turned that into a proposition which is actually offering people hope. You can't solve all the problems in the world, but you can start piece by piece, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, to make some progress. Yeah. And people have got that. And the important thing about overclaiming, I can't emphasize it enough. We've never said Fair Trade is solving all the world's problems in one go. Mm-hmm. We've been quite careful to set out the challenges we're trying to face, the social and environmental challenges, and then the incremental progress, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, to getting us there.
If you have got questions, get ready, because we'll come to you. Michael, we're talking about net zero. To some degree, looking forward, you might say climate change has almost hijacked everything in sustainability. I just wonder what your view on that is. We've got to engage the customer on lots of complicated issues. Climate change is a huge crisis, but we've got to make sure producers are fairly paid and rewarded. How do you try and balance that future?
And they are intimately interlinked, aren't they? So, we talk a lot nowadays about ESG, and sometimes there are sustainability initiatives which focus very much, as you're saying, Dax, on the E, on the environmental agenda. It's obviously really pressing. You can totally see why companies are focusing on that. But our belief in Fair Trade is that unless you tackle the S, the social aspect, at the same time, it'll come unstuck. Partly because these top-down initiatives have a very poor delivery long-term, and you need to start at the bottom. But also, if you look at the advancing regulation, that's, we've talked about in various different forums today, whether it's human rights and environmental due diligence, aspects of the Modern Slavery Act, aspects of reporting, or even the Green Claims Code in the UK, and I don't know that any of you heard the CMA contribution earlier. You cannot separate the things. And of course, also, you can see, because look at farming, farmers are at the sharp end of global supply chains and at the sharp end of the climate crisis. Unless you tackle both things together, you're not actually going to get a security of supply, and you could be a reputational risk at the same time.
So we try and package these things up to say,
it's very much the same story.
Interlinked. Okay, thank you.
Can I
Ruth?
say one more thing?
Yeah.
Because I think when we're talking, it goes back to the Green Claims Code as well. I think when we're talking about supporting our customers on that journey, is also being really honest and making sure that we're not encouraging customers to make certain decisions when the impact of the product is elsewhere.
yeah, quite.
So, all of us here, it's like, for Lush, it doesn't matter we sell naked products if the core natural materials that we're using are causing deforestation or have a huge impact. Or McDonald's talking about like packaging paper, but the big problem is the meat in the supply chain. Or banking, the big problem is investing in fossil fuels, right? So it's like, I think we need to be genuine and honest that we're helping customers make the choices that matter.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. You mentioned something there. A question has come through. Becky, it's quite testing. It says, nice projects, Lloyds, but what is the impact of the funding of fossil fuel companies that your finance leads to? So, one of those difficult questions we all have to face. Yeah. How would you respond?
Yeah, so we've set some targets around the emissions which we finance, and there are actually 23 times the emissions from our own operations. So this is really important, the impact we have through choosing where we put our money. Is it into the good things or the bad things? And we have historically financed fossil fuel companies, but what we've just done, just before Christmas, we were the first UK bank to say that we wouldn't fund any new direct financing of new oil and gas exploration because we felt very clearly that there are enough oil wells in the world. The IEA is very clear on that, the International Energy Agency. So we had a very sort of science-led debate about it and said if we want to keep the world to 1.5 degrees, we absolutely cannot be drilling for new areas of exploration. And then what we're doing with our existing clients is just looking very carefully at what their transition plans are. Are they serious about this? Are they really being part of the move to the transition? And so that's a really significant and big piece of ongoing work for us, which we should hope to report out on at the end of the year. So yeah, really valid question, something that I spend a lot of my life thinking about.
Thank you, Becky. John, testing question for you. Why does McDonald's just follow the consumer? This means waiting. With all the power and influence and meat and dairy has, it sounds like a token commitment.
No, I think that's the point, which is we can't wait for the consumer. We're moving, and we've made commitments around packaging and around climate. We've net zero by 2050 and aggressive targets by 2030. So I think when you look at the recent reports on where the climate is, when you look at the recent reports on some of the claims around greenwashing, you realize that you, one, have to be really careful and authentic in what you're presenting to customers. And on the other hand, if a country is not, look, we're already seeing, when you look at your sort of global footprint of restaurants around the world and what percentage are in water-stressed areas, right? There's already parts of the world that are water-stressed, that are dealing with climate in real time. So, clearly where we have a responsibility is to make sure that with our suppliers, with our franchisees, that we are actually moving together to try to solve the problem, or at least the portion of the problem that we're responsible for, and not necessarily waiting in different parts of the world where the consumer isn't faced with that yet. Because in some cases, in some countries, the consumers are faced with it in real time.
Okay, Michael, follow on, but also there's another question. Any plans for Fair Trade and McDonald's to join up?
No, do you know what? I was just listening.
Cheeky audience, this one.
Listening to John talking.
Could be.
One of the things I think. You're completely right. Don't wait for the consumer. That's exactly right. Yeah. But one of the things we all need to talk about a little bit more is love, right? So when you have a loved brand and a heritage brand, which is so much part of people's lives and speaks to their values in whatever way it does, there is an incredible opportunity to tell that story. 100%. And then we're very clear between us that we tell the problems and then how each of us can be part of the solution.
100%. And I think where there's awareness and where we can drive that benefit for consumers, that's what we do.
Ruth, a testing question which was actually for everyone, but I'm going to give it to you. You haven't been testing.
I am my own testing question.
I'm sure you are.
Yeah, you go.
How can we square the need to reduce consumption with your need to grow through sales?
Perfect question.
Very good question.
It's really interesting because I'm becoming more and more vocal about degrowth internally at Lush, and we haven't been growing. And people are like so worried that we haven't been growing. And I'm like, no, folks, it's a good thing. We haven't been growing, and our profit has reduced because we're internalizing more of the value rather than externalizing, right? And it's true. If you pay tax, if you pay living wage, if you pay your supply chain correctly, if you're using good materials, really, at the end of the day, we should not be. I often think that profit, we are actually, what we call I forgot. you privatize the gains and you share the harm, right? So the minute you try to do that less, we should actually be making less profit because we're sharing, more fairly. So yeah, we're not growing, and I have those conversations, and I share a lot of degrowth strategies, and we keep thinking, what is a business in a post-capitalist world? Because we know we cannot grow forever on a limited planet.
I would just add, I think to us, most businesses want to grow, but I think you're going to see more and more businesses trying to decouple their business growth from their climate impact.
Yeah.
So how do they really focus on, reducing one while being able to grow the other?
At Lush, I discussed this as well. Like, if we're doing so much goodness that, like, we are really restoring watersheds and reforesting, protecting species, reintroduction of species, all the stuff that we do, but like, we've been doing this for a long time, and I cannot put my hand on my heart and say that we have a net positive impact. Okay. Like, really. And, this is Lush. I imagine, like, McDonald's. So by the time we're able to do this, it's too late. So I think we really need to start questioning capitalism.
Okay, right. Good response.
There you go.
Michael, how can fair trade become, we need rapid answers now, how can fair trade become mainstream, not niche?
I think it is mainstream. So there are 6,000 fair trade products in the UK. You can buy fair trade certified products in 125 countries around the world. We work with 2 million farmers and counting. Loads and loads of activity, loads of energy. So I've got a flashing red light saying don't talk anymore. But it is mainstream already.
Okay.
And let me just give you one example
yes,
then.
Go.
So because
why am I saying go? You can't go. Go on, go.
So we work in a global partnership with Mars, for example. We work, all Ben & Jerry's ice cream all around the world is fair trade certified, wherever you buy it around the world. Loads of examples of really brilliant collaborations with companies really trying to be part of the change.
To anyone, customers can be flooded with new labels and complex terms, net zero, carbon positive, zero carbon. How can we improve the transparency of our commitments? Anyone can take that.
Show and tell.
Show and tell.
Be accountable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're being told to sort of. But thank you so much. Very testing questions, which is much appreciated. I think the panel dealt with them. Well, I'll leave you to judge how they dealt with them. But thank you so much to our panel. And thank you very much.